Imagine for a second that you are looking at your retirement fund.
Always a stressful thing to do.
Right. But it is the mid-90s, and you want something safe. You want something, solid. So you put your money into a company that is basically, well, it's the backbone of the entire United Kingdom.
We are talking about a company that employs uh, 250,000 people.
250,000.
Yeah. A company that is literally too big to fail, long before that was even, a catchphrase people used. A company so financially secure, it was sitting on a cash pile of £3 billion.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting there in the bank.
Yeah.
Completely liquid.
Exactly. It was a fortress. I mean, they built the power grid, they built the trains, they built the radar systems that literally defended the country. You would sleep pretty well at night holding that stock.
Oh, absolutely. It was the absolute definition of a blue chip stock. You
Yeah.
bought it, you forgot about it, and you collected the dividends.
But then, and this is where it gets crazy, fast forward just 5 or 6 years, that £3 billion cash pile,
Evaporate.
gone. And the share price hasn't just dipped, it has crashed by 99%. And this absolute titan of industry is effectively dead.
It is one of the most spectacular and, frankly, one of the fastest corporate suicides in history.
So today we are doing a deep dive into the rise and fall of the British General Electric Company, GEC.
And we are going to unpack how a company goes from being called a bank with a factory attached to becoming this massive cautionary tale about dot-com mania.
We have a really great stack of sources for this deep dive today. Biographies of the key CEOs, the actual financial reports from the crash, and some really fascinating retrospective analysis from the business press.
Yeah, and reading through all of them, they paint a picture not just of bad luck, because there is always some bad luck in business, but of pure hubris.
Before we go one inch further, though, let's unpack this immediately because I can already hear the confusion from across the internet. We have to make a very crucial distinction right now.
Right, yes. We're talking about GEC, the General Electric Company of the UK.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about General Electric, or GE, of America.
So no Jack Welch in this story.
No Jack Welch, no Thomas Edison. They are totally separate entities.
Okay, good to clarify.
Although, and this is actually a really key part of the story later on, the pressure to be more like the American GE, to have that flashy, high-growth stock price that Jack Welch was famous for, that is partly what drove the British GEC right off the cliff.
I see. So it's a sort of strategy envy.
Exactly. But yes, strictly distinct companies.
Got it. So this is a uniquely British tragedy. And to understand the scale of the disaster, we really have to understand what was lost. Because GEC wasn't just some big conglomerate. It was a 100-year-old institution.
It really was an institution. And it didn't start as a giant either. If we rewind all the way back to the Victorian era, specifically around 1886, it starts with a shop.
Just a normal shop.
Just a small shop in London run by two immigrants, Gustav Binswanger, who later changed his name to Bing, and Hugo Hirst.
And 1886 is a really interesting time for this. Because electricity isn't really a utility yet. It is this new, mysterious, magical thing. It is basically the AI boom or the internet boom of the 19th century.
Precisely. It was the Wild West. Everyone was trying to figure out how to monetize it. But here is what made Bing and Hirst so incredibly smart. While other people were in their labs trying to invent the perfect light bulb or the perfect generator.
Trying to be the Steve Jobs of the 1880s.
Right. While everyone else was doing that, these guys decided to be the Amazon of the 1880s.
The everything store.
Literally. Their actual motto was everything electrical.
Yeah.
They realized that this new industry was just messy and totally unorganized. So Hugo Hirst, who's this incredibly dynamic salesman, he traveled all over Europe finding the best gadgets.
Like what kind of gadgets?
Switches, electric bells, early telephones, and they took all these disparate parts and put them all in a single catalog.
Which feels surprisingly modern. They standardized a fragmented supply chain.
They absolutely did. In 1887, they published the first electrical catalog of its kind. So if you were wiring a new house or outfitting a factory, you didn't have to hunt down parts from 20 different inventors. You just went to GEC. And they moved fast, too. By 1888, they weren't just selling stuff over the counter. They were manufacturing it themselves.
Vertically integrating.
Yes. They opened a factory in Salford making their own electric bells and telephones.
And then they moved into lighting, right? Which I assume was the absolute killer app of the 1890s.
Huge. Lighting was everything. They invested in lamp manufacturing around 1893, which eventually evolved into Osram in 1909.
Osram is still a massive name.
Exactly. And lighting became their cash cow. It provided this steady, reliable stream of money that allowed them to expand into everything else.
And then, as is often the case with these massive industrial giants, history intervenes. World War I breaks out.
And war changes the equation entirely for a company like this. Suddenly, the government needs everything electrical immediately. They need radios, signal lamps, arc lamp carbons for searchlights to spot zeppelins.
And GEC was perfectly positioned.
They stepped up massively. By the time the war ended in 1918, GEC wasn't just a successful business anymore. It was considered a national asset.
And that momentum carries them right into the huge infrastructure boom of the 20s and 30s.
They were everywhere in Britain. They helped build the national grid. They were practically married to the General Post Office.
The GPO?
The GPO, yeah, which ran the entire telephone system back then. If you made a phone call in Britain in the 1930s, chances are GEC built the exchange that actually connected your call.
But here is where it gets really interesting to me. Looking at the sources, they emphasize that GEC wasn't just banging out widgets on an assembly line. They were doing serious high-level science.
This is a crucial point to understand about their culture. In 1923, they opened the Hirst Research Center at Wembley.
Named after Hugo Hirst.
Yes. And this wasn't just a quality control lab. This was their version of Bell Labs. They were doing fundamental physics research. And that deep investment in science pays off in a way that literally saves the world in the 1940s.
We are talking about the cavity magnetron.
The cavity magnetron. Now, most people know that radar helped win World War II. But early radar was massive. You needed a huge ground station with giant antenna towers to make it work.
Right, the chain home network along the coast.
Exactly. It was great for spotting bombers coming over the English Channel, but you could not put a radar system that big onto an airplane.
Which is a major problem if you are trying to hunt U-boats in the middle of the Atlantic at night. You can't put a radio tower on a bomber.
You need a compact microwave generator. That is what the cavity magnetron was.
And GEC invented that.
Well, it was actually developed by scientists at Birmingham University, specifically John Randall and Harry Boot. But they were associated with GEC, and GEC had the relationship and the sheer industrial muscle to take that delicate lab experiment and figure out how to mass produce it.
So this device allowed them to shrink radar down to a size where it actually fits inside the nose of an aircraft?
And that changed the entire war at sea. It allowed Allied planes to spot submarines surfing at night to recharge their batteries. It is widely cited by military historians as one of the absolutely decisive technologies of the war.
That is incredible.
And GEC was the one making it happen, alongside producing millions of radio valves and lamps for the war effort.
So by 1945, GEC is a hero. It has the defense contracts, it has the national glory. But then the post-war slump hits.
It is the classic peace dividend problem. Government spending drops off a cliff. And honestly, the company had gotten a bit flabby. Hugo Hirst died in 1943, and without his singular drive, the company sort of drifted.
It was big, but it was inefficient.
Very inefficient. Profits were sliding. They had all these different fiefdoms within the company that didn't talk to each other.
They needed a shakeup, and boy did they get one. Enter the man who would define GEC for the next 30 years, Arnold Weinstock.
Lord Weinstock.
Yeah.
You really cannot tell the story of GEC without understanding him. He took over as managing director in 1963.
Following a merger, right?
Yes. GEC merged with his company, Radio and Allied Industries, and his management style was, well, let's call it ruthlessly efficient.
He wasn't the type to walk the factory floor and shake hands with the machinists, was he?
Not at all. There are famous stories that he rarely even visited the factories. He ran this massive industrial empire from a relatively modest office in London.
Just managing the numbers?
He treated GEC like a giant balance sheet. He demanded these incredibly detailed financial reports from every single division manager.
The famous Friday notes.
Yes, the Friday notes. Every Friday, managers had to send their numbers down to London. Sales, inventory levels, profit margins, operational ratios. Weinstock would pore over them over the weekend.
And if the numbers were bad?
If your ratio of sales to stock was off by even a decimal point, you would get a terrifying note or a phone call on Monday morning asking exactly why.
He sounds like the ultimate bean counter, but I guess in a good way.
In the most effective way possible for that era. He hated waste. He hated debt above all else. And he saw that the British electrical industry as a whole was way too fragmented. There were too many small companies competing for the exact same government contracts.
So he went on a merger spree?
He rolled them all up. He bought Associated Electrical Industries, or AEI, in 1967.
That was a huge hostile takeover, wasn't it?
It was vicious. And then he merged with English Electric in 1968. Suddenly, GEC essentially owns everything.
The scale is hard to comprehend.
They own the Marconi company, they own train manufacturing, they own medical devices, they own avionics. By the 1980s, GEC is the largest private employer in the UK.
It was an absolute beast. I'm looking at the portfolio list from the sources here. They owned Yarrow Shipbuilders, making frigates for the Royal Navy. They owned Vickers Shipbuilding and Engineering. They owned Picker in the U.S., making MRI and CT scanners.
They were even in a joint venture making the high-speed trains for Europe, GEC Alstom.
And financially, how did this all look under Weinstock?
Like a fortress. Because Weinstock was so incredibly conservative, he stockpiled cash. He treated the company's treasury like a giant rainy day fund.
Which makes sense for a business that relies on massive, multi-year engineering contracts. You need a buffer.
Exactly. By the mid-90s, GEC was making profits of £1 billion a year, and they had cash reserves of £3 billion.
That is just staggering. £3 billion, fully liquid, just sitting there.
It gave them immense stability. They could weather any recession, any strike, any downturn in government spending. And here's the major turning point in our story, to the City of London, to the exciting new financial world of the 1990s.
Weinstock looked boring.
Ah, yes. The 90s, the internet is arriving. You have Netscape, Amazon, the dawn of the dot-com boom. And here's this giant industrial company sitting on a pile of cash, making old economy things like ships and power plants.
Exactly. Financial analysts started relentlessly criticizing Weinstock. They would ask, why are you sitting on that cash? Do something with it. Be dynamic.
The market didn't want safety anymore. The market wanted growth. It wanted hype. It wanted a story.
So Weinstock retires in 1996. And this is where the tragedy really kicks into high gear. The board brings in a new leadership team to basically modernize the company.
George Simpson is the new CEO, and John Mayo is the finance director.
And the culture clash was instant, right?
Immediate.
Yeah.
Simpson and Mayo looked at GEC, and they didn't see a defensive fortress. They saw a dinosaur. They wanted to transform GEC from a boring industrial conglomerate into a sexy, high-growth TMT company.
TMT, let's define that for the listeners.
Technology, media, and telecoms. That was the magic buzzword sector of the late 90s. If you were classified as TMT, your stock price went straight to the moon. If you were classified as general engineering, your stock was flat.
So they decide to pivot. But we aren't talking about a small course correction here. They didn't just open a software division.
No, they decided to effectively liquidate the company's 100-year heritage to gamble on a bubble.
It really was a liquidation. In 1999, GEC did something that Weinstock would have considered absolute insanity. They sold the defense arm.
The crown jewels of the business.
Marconi Electronic Systems. This was the part of the company that had the steady government contracts, the long-term relationships, the guaranteed income.
And they sold it to British Aerospace for £7.7 billion.
Wow.
Which, by the way, is what formed BAE Systems, which is still a massive defense contractor today.
Okay, so let's pause for a second and look at the bank account. They have the £3 billion cash pile that Weinstock left them. They now have another $7.7 billion from selling the defense business.
They're sitting on over £10 billion.
They could have done anything with that. They could have bought a small country. They could have just paid out massive special dividends to their shareholders and retired as heroes.
They absolutely could have. But they were deeply infected with dot-com fever. They wanted to be a pure-play telecoms giant. They even completely renamed the company. GEC was dead. They officially became Marconi Plus.
Right.
And they took all that cash, the Weinstock legacy and the defense money, and they went shopping in America.
But the timing. My God, the timing of this shopping spree.
It is genuinely tragic. They went shopping at the absolute peak of the market frenzy, 1999 and 2000.
When every tech valuation was completely detached from reality.
Valuations were sky high. They bought a U.S. company called Reltec for £1.3 billion. They bought another one called Four Systems for £2.8 billion.
I was reading about that Four Systems deal in the sources. Didn't they pay a massive premium over the market price?
It was an absurd premium. They paid something like 40 times earnings. They were aggressively bidding against other crazed buyers, throwing money at anything that made internet switches or fiber optics.
Just desperate to buy growth.
They burned through the entire cash pile in record time. And then, and this is the real kicker, they borrowed billions more to keep buying.
So wait, they went from a company with zero debt and $3 billion in the bank to a company with billions in debt in what, 24 months?
Basically, yes. All on the fundamental bet that the demand for internet infrastructure would just keep doubling forever. They honestly thought the party would never end.
And spoiler alert for anyone who wasn't paying attention to the stock market in 2001, the party ended.
The music completely stopped. The dot-com bubble burst.
And the telecoms market didn't just slow down, it completely evaporated overnight.
Companies suddenly stopped buying switches. Everyone realized there was massive overcapacity in the fiber optic networks.
So now Marconi is stuck. They own these incredibly expensive U.S. companies that are suddenly worth a fraction of what they paid just a year ago.
And they have massive debts to service.
And crucially, because they sold the defense arm, they don't have that steady, boring income to pay the bills anymore.
Exactly. They had sold the life raft to buy more weight for the sinking ship. It was a perfect storm of terrible strategic decisions.
Let's talk about the share price, because the numbers are just hard to wrap your head around if you didn't live through it.
It is visceral. At the peak of the mania, when everyone in the financial press thought Simpson and Mayo were absolute geniuses, Marconi shares were trading at £12.50. It was a darling of the FTSE 100.
And after the crash, after they had to issue a massive profit warning in 2001,
the shares fell to 4 pence.
4 pence. From £12.50 down to 4 pence. That is a 99.7% drop.
It is a total wipeout.
It destroyed savings. Pension funds all over the UK took a massive hit. And Lord Weinstock, who is actually still alive to see this happen.
He watched his personal family stake in the company dropped from being worth £480 million to about £2 million.
Can you even imagine spending 30 years counting every penny, literally turning off lights in the office to save electricity, building this impregnable fortress, only to watch your successors burn it to the ground in 2 years?
It is heartbreaking. It reportedly devastated him in his final years. Simpson and Mayo were forced out, obviously, but the damage was done. The company was on life support.
How did they even keep the lights on at that point?
They had to do a massive debt-for-equity swap in 2003, which basically meant handing ownership of the company over to the banks and the bondholders. The original shareholders lost almost everything.
But the story doesn't quite end there, does it? There was still a pulse. They restructured into Marconi Corporation. They were slimmed down, sure, but they were still a major equipment supplier.
There was a pulse. And they had one big hope left for survival. This brings us all the way back to their long history with the UK telephone system.
Right, the GPO days.
British Telecom, BT, was planning a massive, multi-billion-pound upgrade to their network called the 21st Century Network, 21CN.
This was a huge contract, upgrading the whole country to a modern digital network.
Huge. And Marconi was the incumbent. They had been working with the British phone system since Queen Victoria was on the throne. They had the engineers. They knew the legacy network better than anyone.
Everyone, including the city analysts, thought Marconi was an absolute shoo-in for that contract.
It was their path to redemption. If they won that, they survived.
But the world had changed. In 2005, BT announced the winners of the contract.
And Marconi got nothing.
Nothing.
Zero. The contracts went to Huawei and a few other international players. BT, their oldest partner, effectively fired them.
Yeah. Oh, that has to sting.
They looked at the new, slimmed-down, financially unstable Marconi and decided they just weren't a safe bet anymore.
The irony is crushing. The company that literally built the original exchanges gets completely shut out by BT.
That was the final nail in the coffin. The share price collapsed all over again. The board realized they couldn't survive alone as an independent entity.
So they chopped it up.
In 2005, the bulk of the business, the Marconi name, and the actual equipment manufacturing was sold to the Swedish company Ericsson for about £1.2 billion.
Which is a tiny fraction of what they spent buying just one of those U.S. telecom companies a few years prior.
A rounding error compared to what they spent. The leftover bits, which was mostly just a UK services business, were renamed Telent.
And just like that, GEC, the General Electric Company, the backbone of Britain, was gone. Folded voluntarily in 2006.
It is incredible when you zoom out and look at the timeline. 100 years to build an empire, and really about 5 years of bad decisions to completely destroy it.
It really highlights the immense danger of what you called strategy envy earlier. The leadership looked at Cisco and Microsoft and felt inadequate.
They didn't value what they were actually good at. Heavy engineering, defense, managing those long, slow government contracts.
It is the curse of being boring.
Yeah.
Weinstock was criticized for it constantly. Why are you so boring? Why aren't you dynamic?
And yet that boring strategy having massive cash reserves, holding diverse assets. That was the only reason they survived the hyperinflation of the 70s and the deep recessions of the 80s.
You know, we hear the word pivot all the time in business today. Startups pivot, tech giants pivot.
But a pivot implies keeping one foot firmly planted while you move the other. You change direction, but you keep your solid base.
Exactly. GEC didn't pivot, they jumped. They took both feet completely off the ground by selling the defense arm just to leap onto a moving train that was heading straight for a cliff.
It is amazing to think about the physical legacy they left behind, though. I mean, the cavity magnetron fundamentally changed the course of world history. The Osram bulbs lit up millions of homes.
The heavy trains they built are probably still running on some branch lines today.
The products were real.
Yeah.
The engineering was world-class. And that is the truly sad part of the story. The people working in the factories didn't suddenly get bad at their jobs in 1999.
The corporate strategy failed them.
Completely. It shows that no matter how good your underlying product is, bad financial timing and excessive debt can kill any company.
So if we pull this all together for you listening at home, what is the big takeaway from all these sources, aside from the obvious lesson of don't buy tech stocks at 40 times earnings?
I think it comes down to understanding your core DNA as a business. GEC was a conglomerate. It was essentially a hedge against risk.
Right.
By trying to turn it into a focused, highly volatile tech stock, they removed the very thing that made it special, which was its resilience.
They tried to be something they weren't.
And they paid the absolute ultimate price for it.
It definitely makes me look at the boring companies in my own portfolio a little differently. You know, the utilities, the heavy manufacturers. Maybe being unsexy is a feature, not a bug.
In the long run, boring usually wins. Or at least, boring survives to fight another day.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the rise and fall of GEC, from selling electric bells in a Victorian shop to a £10 billion collapse.
Quite a ride.
But here's a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. We are living in another era of massive hype right now.
Absolutely.
Every company right now, no matter what they actually make, is under immense pressure to have an AI strategy or a metaverse play.
The pressure from analysts is identical to the late 90s. Pivot or die. That is what all the consultants are saying.
But GEC serves as a pretty grim reminder. Does a legacy of 100 years of real innovation matter if you bet the farm on the wrong future? Just because you can pivot doesn't always mean you should.
Sometimes the absolute smartest move is just standing still.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.